All right. Good morning, everybody. Hello, and welcome to the Coach's Corner, brought to you by the Endurance Lab, where you can join the coaches live and unscripted as we recap the week and answer your questions from the forum. My name is Jason Flores, one of your Endurance Lab coaches, and I am joined by Taya Friedstead, Mitch Dangermon, and our nutritional therapist, Andrea Cullen. Good morning, everybody.
Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hello. Just a reminder, we are live on several different platforms. So what you see is what you get and is what you hear today. And it's raw, unedited commentary from our coaches. We may be getting Coach Ian from an airplane in just a couple minutes, so we will stand by for that. But this also gives you a chance to be part of the show by asking your questions. So I will get this shared out, jump on live, and you can also be part of this show. So we're going to jump straight into the hot topics of the lab. I'm going to throw this over to Coach Mitch, and he's going to introduce our first topic of the day as I get this shared out to all of our friends. Take it away, Coach.
All right, Greg. So earlier this week, I was leading a group workout. It was the Endurance Lab Skills and Torque workout, and it involved a lot of, in the middle of a lot of cadence work, low cadence and high cadence. And one of the riders asked, why are we doing this? Why do I need to do it? First, let's set kind of the scene here. Remember that when we're talking about power equals your cadence, so it's your rotational speed on the pedal, times torque, which is the force that you're putting on the pedal. So if you're going to increase your power, you can either increase your cadence or your torque, and it's a combination of the two. One of the riders, Antonio L. from France, actually pointed out a practical reason why he's happy that he trains cadence. He was on a ride, and he actually had a derailleur issue on his front derailleur and was no longer able to shift into the big ring. So he was stuck in the small ring in the front. So he's pedaling at a higher cadence than he wanted to, and he was stuck trying to stay with the group. But because of the high cadence work he'd done, he was comfortable doing that, or at least able to gut it out and stay with the group until he had a chance to rest and then fix the derailleur. So, that's one thing is that, sometimes we have mechanicals and we've got to pedal at cadences we're not used to. But as we go through other riders and we look at the pro riders, you're going to see that Lance Armstrong was a high cadence climber. In fact, he actually even time trialed at about a cadence of 100. Chris Froome, another high cadence rider, when he climbs, he's climbing way into the hundreds. But then you look at other riders like Contador. Contador was more of a dancing on the pedals, and he could climb at maybe a lower cadence out of the saddle. What's also interesting is that the 1 hour record, when like Wiggins and some of those folks have set the 1 hour record in cycling, they've actually been around 100 RPM on their cadence. But what's interesting is that there's been scientific studies that have done that looked at the efficiency of your pedal stroke and power and torque, and they've actually said that your efficient cadence is like 60, which is really low. Like when I'm at 60, I feel like I'm like pedaling through butter or something, right? So question is, what is it and why do we do it? So if I look at myself personally, when I'm riding on Zwift, a lot of times I'm riding 95, 100, around in that range. But if I get outside on my time trial bike, and if I look back at like the 40K time trial I did a couple years ago, or some of my training, without even knowing it, I'm slowing down into that 80 range, and I'm really just kind of working at a methodical kind of steady pace. I'd be interested to know the coaches here on the Coach's Corner, what your thoughts are and what kind of your personal experience with cadence is.
I'll start off by saying that if somebody were to ask me, what's your favorite cadence? Mm-hmm. I would say it depends. It depends on the terrain. It depends on what I'm trying to achieve. It depends on the duration. I would say I will never be at one cadence the whole time. I'm not a time trialist. I don't do time trials. So that aside, I would say that for everything else, be it a group ride, a race, a long day on the saddle, climbing, etc., I would be varying my cadence a lot. So I could be going up a climb, and I will be doing anywhere between 60 and 70 RPMs for a while. Then I'll get out of the saddle and I'll do 70 RPMs. Or if there's a little bit of a flat section, I'll be accelerating at higher RPMs, 90 perhaps. So it really depends on the terrain. And I would say that particularly in the last year, I have been working matching cadence with the power that I'm using and the terrain. So those three things combined is going to be a function of how efficient you are and how fast you go. And so the more that you train different cadences, and we have a lot of that incorporated into our workouts, the more efficient you get. And also it's a tool for you. You'll see how you're able to accelerate a certain power, the power. It might not be that, if you're climbing, you're always at 70 RPMs, 85% of FTP. No, it can vary. It depends. Do you need to go faster? Do you need to get to the top fast? Or are you pacing yourself for a little bit? But I would say overall, over time, I think the best thing for riders would be to learn to match your cadence and experiment how different cadences behave with different power when you're out on the road. And this is something very difficult to get an idea from when you're doing indoor riding, right? So it really has to be outside to have a better idea of that.
Yeah, so I think Taya's right here with ability to train and to understand that the use of different cadences are and be able to use that at different times is important. And I think outside is the key to application, but we could definitely train this indoor.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And let's say that you're not an expert in cadence, you don't pay attention to it too much. One thing you might have felt intuitively or instinctively is that when sometimes you push hard on your pedals for few watts, and sometimes you're pushing super easy on your pedals and you're doing a lot of power. So that is all a function of what Mitch was saying. It's torque, it's cadence, right? It's a combination of all of those things that translate into power that you'll see on the bike. But yeah, indoors is good for training cadence because you take out all of the other elements. You don't have traffic lights. You don't have, you might need a flat section because you want to do, for example, the skills and torque workout, which was 9 minutes at, alternating 30 seconds, high and low cadence and keeping the same power, which is very challenging, but great workout. And so there, what you're working on is your neuromuscular connections. It's that brain muscle communication that will allow you to be more efficient on the bike. And going back to Chris Froome, Chris Froome at the beginning, he was thought to be a climber, but really he is a general all-rounder type rider. And I would say if you want to look at climbing, definitely look at the pure climbers if you want to pay attention to the cadence and what they do.
Absolutely. And on the neuromuscular side of things, that's definitely important to bring up. You would be surprised how little it takes to turn on those connections, essentially. As little as doing, high cadence spin work at the end of your warm-up or at the end of your workout could easily give you enough to kind of turn those connections on, because so often do you find yourself in this middle range. A lot of time for riders it'll be somewhere between 85 and 95 RPM, but easily if you get yourself out of that zone, you can activate those pathways that allow you to use that when you need it, and there won't be a great amount of fatigue that when you jump into the hundreds where your heart rate will skyrocket, or if you go down below 85 or you get into the 70s and your muscles really start to strain and your heart rate starts to decrease. Essentially, it's a inverse proportional thing as you use one system or another.
Yes. So if you go into some of the science on it, there's actually an amazing number of scientific papers that have been done on cycling cadence and power output, which is amazing to me. So what they found is that lower cadences are more efficient for the vast majority of normal riders who don't have huge aerobic capacities and can't sustain large power outputs. So what does that mean? So Foss and Helling, they did a paper on efficient cadence, and they found that a higher cadence is more efficient as the workload increases. So our stronger, more accomplished cyclists, so think of our pros, they're going to use a higher cadence. This is going to be more efficient for them at those higher power outputs. So what that kind of also means is that riders who are beginning or haven't been cycling for years, don't have the largest FTPs in the world, they should not really be targeting that 100 RPM for like their normal cadence. So don't try to emulate Chris Froome, Lance Armstrong, Bradley Wiggins. That 80 to 90 range is probably going to be appropriate. So again, the experienced and elite cyclist power output increases, their cadence should increase as well. Some of the other takeaways, which was interesting, was that I think we have Ian coming here. So
literally on.
So they actually they did. Hey,
I can hear like the airplane mode.
The actual airplane.
Hey. Imagine his seatmates. They'll be like, "What the
heck is this guy doing?"
Yes,
we do hear you. But real quick, and we'll finish this up. So they actually did science around sprinting, and they found that the optimal sprinting cadence is actually around 120. They did some studies around time trials, and that time trial cadence is maybe around 80, which is interesting. Is that where I settled in at? But really your goal should be, and I think we touched on this with Jason and Taya saying that, you really have to train it and you have to practice it. Your goal is to maximize your power and speed at the most economical heart rate possible. So use heart rate as a proxy for efficiency, train it, look at your heart rate at different cadences and see how it works out for you. Good morning, Coach Ian.
I see Ruby.
Okay, first question of the day. Are you in first class?
No, he's not.
Absolutely not.
And what airlines are you
on? Southwest.
All right. Oh man. So we're talking about cadence, Ian. We're going through kind of our natural cadence and the ability that it takes, or the training that it takes, in order to get us, connected and being able to use higher or lower cadences.
So can we go back to?
Yeah, I naturally pedal at about 183 RPMs.
He's already suffering from lack of oxygen on the brain.
Yep. I try to match beats per cadence is really what I do.
Yes, that's usually ideal, especially in workouts. But obviously, that's trainable, like we were saying. Taya, what were you saying there?
I was going to talk about sprinting. And I think, many of our viewers and listeners will be thinking to themselves, how am I going to do 120 RPMs on a sprint if I'm standing? Which is very hard if you think about it. I would say you have to start, again, it's
practice.
It is, but there's so much more about sprinting than just focusing on your cadence, right? Your gearing and all of that, your body position. If you're able to get to 80 RPMs to start with, and 90, that is a big accomplishment, I would say.
Well, and one of the things too is it's a big concern with gearing. And I think too many people overgear and undergear when they get out to sprint, and they don't really pay attention to that shifting as well. And so when you get out on that sprint, if you look at a guy like Cavendish or Kittle or whatnot, or Sagan, they're in a big gear. So they're usually in that 53 by 11 or 53 by 15, and they don't start at 120 RPMs or 100 RPMs. They might start their sprint at 75 and then they ramp it up. 75,
and that's a good point, because when I look at files from a lot of our athletes and they're doing a sprint workout on a trainer, I see sometimes people starting their sprint at 45 RPMs, and 50, which is too low.
That's possible.
Right. It's wildly inefficient. If you have to spend more energy.
I think we're losing Ian here a little
bit.
He's probably going to say, if you're going to spend more energy to try to get what we call get over that gear, or to kind of compensate or get on top of the power, that is essentially less efficient. So this comes down to practice. This comes down to again, we always talk about being able to create the power. Can you create the power needed to do a sprint from a workout? Then can you get the right gearing when you're outdoors so that you're able to get yourself set up in the correct gear? Again, one of the reasons why we have a lot of our riders, when they do this kind of work, come out of ERG mode, because that allows you to change the gears and do the things you need to do to be able to try and see if you can connect the power with the actual gearing and changes. Not saying that you should be changing gears, and that may be what came across in the conversation there, but in fact, being able to choose the right gear, and when you're on that group ride and when you're on that ride, to be able to choose which gear you should be in as it gets ramped up before you're essentially taking off in that final 500. And a lot of times people think sprints are super long, but in fact, sprints are very, very short in real life. They're about 100 to 200 meters, and they don't last for very long. Lead outs and like people increasing in speed does take a long time, but in fact, the actual sprint itself can be very, very short.
And I'll make a comment about sprints just because we're talking about it. In the short sprint. So if you know you're not a sprinter, then don't wait for those final 100 meters, 200 meters. Then you should be practicing in your training a 30-second sprint, right? Or, longer than that. Just try something that you can do that perhaps the sprinters cannot because of it. So you're going to have to take off for the line a little earlier. So just keep that in mind. And so back to cadence and standing, if you're going to do 30 seconds, then obviously you're not going to be 30 seconds at 120 RPMs, even if you get, so you'll be perhaps at that 80 to 90 RPMs. So something to practice as well.
Yeah, that is a really good point. If you don't have that top end where it's like a big spike of power, let's say 1,000, 1,200, 1,300 watts, you're going to want to take off earlier. You want to use your strength, whether it's a minute out, 45 seconds out, and really push the pace, because for those riders that are just trying to sit in, for example, now we're talking about kind of dynamics of the final 1,000 meters. You are looking at, if you are increasing the pace and making it more difficult rather than letting sprinters just sit in as they come to the time where they're going to sprint, then at that time, if you raise that pace, they will be more fatigued as they do their sprint. Then, really final sprints in kind of normal realms are not obnoxiously high, because at the end of it all, people are really pushing up the pace anywhere from 3 to 5K out, and by the time people get to 1K, your powers are quite low, and really you'll see sprints like nominally for our men's sections and the power files that I've seen, really 700 for guys who normally can sprint from a dead stop or from like on workouts easily in the thousands. So really people think that this is huge explosion, unless you're a pro like a Cavendish or a Sagan. Really, you're only going to maybe 2 or 350, because the person who can maintain that higher wattage for longer, guess what? You're going to win because everyone else is dropping their watts. So really, it's about maintaining a high amount of wattage longer than the next person. And that's where cadence is important, because if you're having to change gears, you're losing time, one, and power can be dropping. Linda Mercado is asking if the tin can and string is not reaching the ground for Ian since he's on the So I mean, we've got Andrea here in the upper corner. You have some experiences here with cadence and your use as far as your triathlons and training.
I think like I would have started out in lower cadences around the 80s, and then through work with the endurance lab, I would have learned to be more flexible. And I think it's more fuel sparing when you have options and an ability to change your cadence for various things, efficiency. So for me, it's only benefited me. I think like when you're racing or doing long rides, intuitively you do change it around a bit. So that's been my experience. The number has slowly been going up, but definitely it's always a little bit lower on the road or when I'm racing. But I think the training means you're better able to do that, and the training is important.
That's a good point. And that Andrea brings up, it's different kind of energy systems that you're using. So if we call kind of a balanced energy system use around 85 to 95, if we were to increase our cadence to a higher amount, it would be more, I would say, more cardiovascular in use. And then if we were to lower that cadence 70, 80, kind of on the lower end, you're looking at it becoming a more muscular system. Speaking of muscles, we have Ian back. Very serious.
Or at least a still of Ian.
And that's his wife next to him, like out. We'll see if the internet stays in enough. So, yeah, as far as energy systems, anything else to say about that with cadences?
No, but it is a good point. And if you are I'll go back to climbing again. If you're climbing at very high RPMs, you are going to fatigue faster, actually, because of that aerobic system. And you're going to be, because of your breathing, right? You're going to be breathing harder, and depending on the grade as well and the length of your climb. So keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a question.
Yeah.
So when we're doing a lot of the cadence work, and I'm almost sure Thea has made that comment on the files when we're getting instructions, it's watching our heart rates at various cadences to get an idea of where we're sort of more efficient. I think that's another.
I mean, you can always go back and you can always go back and look on your Training Peaks workout files after you're done and look at those cadence sections and start playing around with it, indoors, outdoors, and go back and look at the data, right? Go ride, try different power levels, try different cadences, and see what your heart does. See what what works for you.
Yeah, and for triathletes, noticing how your legs fare on the run. So we may be very powerful on the lower cadences, grinding it out, but if we haven't trained our strength, we're going to suffer it on the run. I think so. I think that's where being efficient across a lot of cadences is probably good.
Yeah, and I think that also speaks to Tim made a mentioned as far as gearing is concerned. So when climbing, a lot of times you'll find that having the right gear or enough gear is important so that you can use a varying number of cadences. A lot of times you'll find on a local ride, 4th of July, the mountains that we normally have to share with the cars is actually closed. So you've got anywhere from 30 to 50 miles of mountain roads up and down that you're able to kind of ride on. And you'll find every kind of rider there, and people coming in way out geared. And they're like, yeah, I'm supposed to like try to, do 90 to 100 cadence. But in fact, they're riding something like a 39-25. And for those that have climbed with that gearing, you're completely out of gear and you're going down to 80, 70, 60, all on the lower numbers because there's just not enough gears. So gearing is important, having enough gears, and kind of jumping out of the traditional view of having a 53-49, 53-39, and only up to like an 11-25 gearing is we've got to get out of that and kind of open up. I know, Mitch, what's your setup on your 7? I know you've got a good amount of gearing out there. I know I run a 32 on a 34-32. I think you're the same, right?
I have very standard gearing, and actually, when I go out west, I would look into getting different gearing because I always want one more gear.
Right.
Michigan, we don't have enough hills. I mean, up north we have a little bit, but really not enough. Andy Jenner brings up a good point, though. His question is a higher heart rate worse, though? Surely it indicates using aerobic more and saving strength for later in the ride, which is a strategy, right? You might see that riders early in a race or a ride might use a little bit higher cadence to save the legs for later on. So I think it is, like Teo was saying, is you've got to mix it up. And, if you're in a climb, you could do low cadence, but then you could change it to a little bit higher cadence, and you're allowing the legs to flush and using some different muscles.
Another point is if you're faced with a race that's really windy, you're going to have to pick your cadence up, aren't you, to be able to control your bike a little bit better. So being trained for that, I know as someone light, I have to start pedaling much faster or I'm going to fall off. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, I think it is important because it is going to vary depending on the conditions, the weather conditions, and to make that adjustment. And so that's why it's important to make be able to, because maybe you won't be able to, and you'll be looking down at your power file and you're looking at your miles per hour, and it just won't match. But you need to be able to kind of overcome that, and the way to be able to do that is to get, let's say, below that normal range that you're in order to get above where you go as far as like miles per hour for.
So, but don't worry too much about it. If you're listening to this and thinking to yourself, wow, this is one more thing that I need a spreadsheet for. It's really not, because if you do a lot of this in training, you're going to, again, going back to that connection that you build within your neuromuscular system, you're gonna end up doing it almost automatically. So, yeah.
So looks like your connection isn't clean to Coach Ian, so he is going to take his flight and send in his notes, he said. So if he has any messages, he will send in Facebook Live. But again, thanks for those thanks for those viewers that have joined us here on Facebook Live. We've got a good, steady of viewers, and if you do have questions, again, we are taking live questions and experiences. Andy Jenner is always open, putting in his words and experience. So that. So, all right. Anything else as far as cadence from the coaches here today? We've got a good conversation going, kind of with cadences, kind of how to use, how to tap into them. We talked a little bit about gearing, and some optimal cadences. Everything. Looks good. All right, we're gonna shift gears. Up to Andrea. She's got a whole kitchen worth of supplements to show us. All right, so I will toss it over to her, and we are going to talk a little bit about branched chain amino acids. Have you taken them? How do you take them? And what flavor do you like?
Okay, so if people want to read a little bit more, there's 2 clinical papers that are very interesting. One of them is the ISSN position statement on protein. And the other one, which I have here, it's a review. It was written in 2017 by Wolf, and it's branched chain amino acids and muscle protein synthesis in humans, myth or reality. It's a good paper because when we're on Google, all we read is good stuff about branched chain amino acids. And this just throws out a few more questions there about the fact that we're not rats and what's happening in the real world. And one point that it makes that's really interesting. So when we read about the branched chain amino acids, and I'll just backtrack a little bit, what are branched chain amino acids? They're amino acids, which are the final breakdown of protein. There's 3 of them: leucine, isoleucine, and valine. They're essential, which means that our body can't produce them by converting other amino acids. We need to get them in from our diet. So they're essential in our bodies. The major sources of branched chain amino acids in our diets would be meat, poultry, dairy products, and peanuts actually have quite a high content. So that immediately makes you think about vegans and vegetarians. So they may need to be the ones that we think about regarding supplementation or being a little bit more vigilant with their protein intake. You would hope for some dairy intake. At least that's going to help. I think being vegan, it's going to be very, very hard to get that essential amino acid and branched chain amino acid intake in. Supplements are an isolated component of food. So always be mindful when we tend to get very scientific about our supplement strategies and think it's fantastic. But every time we take something in isolation, we've taken it out of everything else. So there's many building blocks to our diet that are necessary for our sport and our health. And when we think in isolated little boxes, we tend to forget the importance of other things. Food is synergistic. It has loads of everything, and science is never going to be able to break that down and put it into a product. So just be mindful of that. So when we talk about the research on branched chain amino acids, what we tend to see is that they stimulate an increase in protein synthesis, which is fantastic. Now, leucine tends to drive this even more. So when we're supplementing with amino acids, we want there to be a slightly higher leucine content within that. That's why you'll often see whey protein fortified with leucine or branched chain amino acids, et cetera, et cetera. So when we have this come into the bloodstream through ingestion, it will trigger off a stimulus to the body. But the one thing everyone forgets, and even as I was reading the paper, so that's the stimulus, but you still need the building blocks. So that stimulus isn't going to have a physiological response unless you actually have the other building blocks of your protein and amino acids, the energy and the nutrition factors there. So this is why just taking some branched chain amino acids before a workout may not be enough in the real world practical situation. So the food still needs to be there, or the branched chain amino acids in something. So I just wanted to point that out. I'm always really curious about products, and I have, been known to. I used to mix branched chain amino acids into yogurt and put some jam because they're really bitter. And I'd eat it, and I'd go to the gym and I'd do my workouts. And I suppose hundreds of dollars later, you kind of ask yourself, did it actually do anything? I thought it did. but you kind of suddenly stop using all these products and you realize you're just the same. You're recovering the same, you're training the same. I'm not sure it actually did anything. So there's probably certain times these are going to be beneficial and other times when we're just wasting our money. So when are those times? So we need to think a bit. So we get the sales pitch and it's like, oh my God, I need to take this. But you need to ask yourself, do I? And when is it appropriate? So this is where we always talk about in nutrition periodization, looking at the training session and the function and purpose of the training session. And then what do we need to eat around that and what is going to benefit the most? So branched chain amino acids, in my mind, work best when we may be cutting our calories really low, or it may be a very hard power strength session that we may want to get a little bit more of these branched chains and essential amino acids in to stimulate the muscle growth and recovery process. Fitness models who may have a very low calorie intake may benefit from them more, or our longer training sessions. We may want to have a product on our bike that contains some protein or essential amino acids or branched chain amino acids in there. So ask yourself first, what's the session and the goal? And is this actually going to help me? Then you need to ask yourself, well, can I just use real food? Some options that will get in more of these important amino acids would be eggs on rye bread. But so I'm going to give you the bare bones of the meal. I want you to always think, well, I need to be adding in my veg or my healthy fats or things like that. But I'm giving you the bare bones here. So an omelet or a chicken omelet, egg and oat pancakes, some meat, some chicken fillets, some cold leftover beef, canned tuna or salmon are going to be helpful. And they're really quick. Open the can, maybe add a bit of avocado or hummus and put it on a cracker or oat cake or some whole grain bread, or some cooked potato. A whey and peanut smoothie, beef burger and salad, cold eggs, egg and chicken muffins. They can be made up in advance and frozen. A rice and beef dish or a rice and chicken dish. So you could make up a bulk amount of that and have that for your pre-training or post-training. So they're just a couple of ideas that will get these branched chains into you. But always think, can I do it the food option? And then second, do I need to add in a little bit more? When we're going through more calorie restricted phases or losing weight, or if it's very important that we gain lean mass or maintain our lean mass. So maybe think about a lightweight rower. These can help, but meal timing is going to be even more important. So instead of thinking about, well, I need to take some branched chain amino acids before my session, it's your meal timing that becomes more important when you're conscious about your calories. So time your meals for before and after your training and maybe lighten it up at the rest of the time. So that's going to be one way to get in what you need without overdoing the calories everywhere else. Like I said, vegetarians and vegans may benefit more from supplements. So what choices do we have? Well, number one, food. Number two, of second importance, I would say using a fortified protein product to make a meal. So something like, this is an Irish whey protein brand. It's safe for athletes. It's run through Informed Sport. In America, you have NSF. So you need to make sure you've got quality products. But you will see on it, it has 5 grams of branched chain amino acids. So this whey protein can be used to make a pancake. It can be used in a smoothie with maybe some cottage cheese or yogurt that's going to add up. You're bringing a bit more of these essential amino acids. So you've got your whey protein. Now, I don't like whey, so I use a vegan protein. So this is Vegasport. You can get it. It's an American product. I would get it in through iHerb. That is 6 grams of branched chain amino acids in there. It also has turmeric, tart cherry, and some probiotics. It tastes nice, and I use that for pancakes or smoothies, or I'll mix it just into some yogurt if I'm stuck and I'm not eating real food. Another option.
I told you she had the whole kitchen.
Oh, did you notice? Yeah. Wait. Did you notice when she put the first can down, the whey one, it was heavy. The second one was
empty.
It's right? Actually empty.
Yeah, there you go. You know which one?
So I've transitioned from this one because I need a bit more support for my health at the moment. So this is an exceptional product that I use for a lot of ill clients, but it doesn't mean that it can't be used by athletes. This is like an all-in-one medical grade protein product. It has all of your vitamins and minerals, anti-inflammatory ingredients, extra amino acids. So you've got things like curcumin, milk thistle, taurine, MSM, grapeseed, green tea, betaine, N-acetylcysteine, sulforaphane for detoxification function. So it's kind of got everything in there, and that will provide protein as well. So for some athletes that may want to consider adding a multi and protein, you can kind of do it in something like this. Now, it's not cheap. It's about $70, but you could not put all of these ingredients together cheaper if you were to try and do it single ingredients. So that one's very, very good. So that's using a protein product and try and kind of get it into real food as much as you can, which can be really helpful when you're caught for time. Then we're looking at more training specific products, which would be an endurance product, which has carbohydrates and either protein or BCAAs or peptides in there. So the product that I use is this one. Now there's a gazillion products. So if anyone has questions about, is my product good, you can ask away on the forum and I'll answer that, because I can't go through all of them. I'll just show you what I have. So this is a Dutch product. There's a company in Holland that make a peptide product called PeptoPro, which is a very specialist breakdown of protein into di and tripeptides that are immediately absorbed. And that's in a carbohydrate product. So this is what I use when I'm racing or if I'm doing a very long training event. So I'm getting some protein as well as carbohydrates. It's just a small amount. It probably doesn't have quite enough BCAAs, but I eat as well, so it's not crucial. My muscles haven't fallen off yet, so I'm okay. Garen uses a product for very long training sessions that it's done by a company in England called Bulk Powders. It's Informed Sport Safe, and it's called Endure. That has Vitargo, which is your carbohydrate, PeptoPro, BCAAs, glutamine, and a lot more in there all in one. It seems to go down well. It's palatable, it settles well in the stomach, and that's used in long training sessions. It's not actually used racing, but for longer sessions, like a 4-hour on the bike, it's very helpful. Or between sessions, between the brick, it can be quite helpful. And I found one on Google earlier that I hadn't seen before, which is Cis have a whey gel.
Huh.
Has anyone seen it? So it's like a gel, but it's whey, and that's going to provide you with some amino acids. So if you're on a long ride or you're doing a power session and you haven't managed to eat properly or something, you could chug that down in the middle. Or if your stomach was pretty good, it could be something that could be used in transition on your triathlons. I'm getting nudges here about, I think this is like Jason's dream list. I've had, what was it, ice cream with BCAAs?
Yeah.
What else did you have there?
Recovery ice cream, with whey.
Yeah, so I've got a good amount of comments here. So we'll start at the bottom with the Ian is talking about, he likes to do creative mixes of his supplements, and he's commenting about BCAA ice cream, mixing that in. That's definitely I guess one way to get your BCAAs in. We got George Calderia. We know him from the Zwift Academy Facebook group, and that he actually uses BCAAs prescribed in his nutrition because he's also doing strength exercises in his daily routine. Doesn't really allow him to get it in from his normal food. So that is a conversation that we brought up at the beginning here, where if you're not able to get the foods in during the day, let's say depending on your lifestyle or your availability in your area, or during your day, do you need to consider doing this as a post-workout to supplement? I think a key thing that a lot of times get missed is a lot of times you'll find that riders are taking BCAAs separately or by themselves. But Andrea had mentioned making sure that those are the triggers to get things working. But in fact, we need the building blocks and the proteins, whether they come from lean meats or that sort of thing, or if they're coming from a whey protein drink. We need to have both of those on board, and that's why so many times you're finding those together in those protein drinks. So taking them by themselves, there has been some small little corners of sports supplementation where riders are taking that and trying to do fasted workouts on the minimal amount of proteins and fuels, and they're using that. But I think in the general sense, using them properly to trigger recovery and do the things that they need to do, having that on board, and then real food is super important. I can go down with a couple more and we can chat about them. Linda Brocado, she likes to use lean meats, eggs, and dairy in her diet using real foods because she does have issues with low ferritin and iron. A whole nother subject on the second part of that, but definitely whole food sources important. But any comments, Andrea, as far as like if you're having low levels, those sort of things, in whole supplements versus powders and that sort of direction?
Oh, I'm all for real food. And that point in this paper about, well, it's only the stimulus. You need to have everything else there. So doing a fasted session on with 5 grams of BCAAs it's a teaspoon. You're going to burn that as energy. And then where are you? You're into your muscles and your glycogen stores. So you're better 1 or 2 fasted sessions a week. It's for a different purpose. It's not, and then the rest of the time to fuel well so that your muscles have the amino acids in the bloodstream to mitigate the muscle breakdown and encourage the recovery. Now you could do, so for example, if you had your whey, yeah, great. What you could do then is add in the single amino acids. So we'll go through, we have our glutamine and then you have your BCAAs. So you could just toss it all in together. But the problem with BCAAs, so this is cola flavor. And so Garen did it one night. He thought, I'll be really smart and I'll toss it all in together. So everything went in the smoothie, the chocolate whey, turmeric, peanut butter, Coca-Cola flavored BCAAs.
Oh my God.
BCAAs are very, very bitter. That's why I just used to mix them up into something thick and add a bit of jam in. But you can do it.
If you go ahead, Taya, go ahead.
What can happen too is doubling things up, right? Because let's say you take the supplement to take the BCAA, let's say tablets, and then you're eating too. And so you're doubling up in terms of it's not necessary. I don't even know if it's harmful. I've done that I've done that for a long time. When I first started cycling, I would go to the place where I used to train indoors with other people, and there was a corner there with all the BCAAs, and everybody's like, "Oh yeah, that stuff is great. You should take it." And then I started taking it on top of everything else. So I'm pretty much doubling up. And the other thing I think, so that's question number one. Are you then? Is it too much and can it be harmful? The other thing is people worry so much about the numbers too. You start to everything. We were talking about cadence a little earlier. It's power files. It's heart rate. Oh, let's look at BCAAs and all those milligrams and grams and let's add everything in. So everything just you become attached to them. And you might be the kind of person who look at your food and say, I'm not sure how many grams of BCAAs in this little, omelet that I'm eating. What if it's not enough?
Yeah, I think we can get a bit crazy with it, and food is really smart, and it's packaged up in a way that it all sort of works together, and the amino acids balance one another, and this is why variety is really important. And I was working with some athletes a good few years ago at Olympic level, and we did amino acid profiling on them. And if you eat the same thing over and over again, you're going to be lacking in something and getting too much of something else. So this is where variety is incredibly important. And also, if you are going to stack up a load of products, you need to know what's in there. Yeah. And products, what it says on the label, if it's not a very good company, is not always what exactly is in there. And then a lot of other companies, to cut corners, will have items listed as a proprietary blend. A proprietary blend is, there could be a lot of one thing and hardly anything of the next. So I prefer the approach of keeping things very, very simple, just not products with a gazillion things. Okay, the medical protein it's slightly different. That is specialist. But generally with things with sports nutrition, keeping it simple and taking the things that are the most important. And then there's a lot of other things we could be doing. And you have to ask yourself, well, is it really going to make a difference? Don't drive yourself nuts.
Yeah. So on that, we did talk a little bit about periodization. Andy Jenner talks about thinking about stopping supplements, for example, in the wintertime during base period, and then maybe ramping it up. Ian follows up with going into a power or building phase and adding those sort of things. Where in the periodization kind of period do we find that we should recommend riders to look into maybe using more supplements during a certain time versus another?
I think regularly, just like with your training, you should be just taking a step back and looking at how am I? How's my body? How am I feeling? What's my health like? What are my current goals? And then slot in what the most important thing is. I do agree we shouldn't be taking supplements all of the time. Like even with a product like really great, like Thorne, I don't know what traces of solvent are in here that came along with the process of making it. And with other companies that aren't so great, there's worries about toxic metals and all sorts of stuff in there. So we have the same concerns with real food, I know, but we are a bit more in control of it. So it's always asking, well, how do, for me, I would always be looking at supporting my immune system and my general health. Then it's what is this specific training block doing? There may be times when we need to be more vigilant with our recovery and assisting that. And then there's other times when the function of the block we're in is slightly different. So it's just taking a step back. And if you don't understand what your current block is meant to be achieving, your coach will know. And they'll be like, well, we're working on all of this. And then intuitively, you'll know how to support that.
And then the energy, you talked about how you're feeling, et cetera. That's also very important to see how you feel in terms of energy. We had a rider in the lab who was having issues with low energy, et cetera. And she noticed that increasing her protein intake was very beneficial. So and this is how the conversation even started in the forum. She was taking it in the form of BCAAs as a supplement. And then the question was, but I don't want to take this forever. Should I be taking it? And so that's where the conversation all started here. But I guess a question for you also, Andrea, for older athletes, would you say, because we lose muscle faster, is that, I guess, right? And so is it recommended that we up our protein intake?
I would feel so from food to support the anabolic process. And probably, I suppose, depending on activity levels, a lot of people can start to drop down their carbohydrates somewhat. Fats still remain very important, the essential ones, especially for women, because we need certain fat stores and a certain intake of fat to help maintain our hormone generation when our menstrual cycle is no longer doing that. That's why being too thin is never a good thing. But also we need to look at supporting our cardiovascular system and our bone health. They would be two other really important ones. Just eating really healthy, as healthy as we can go.
Yeah. So Ian brings up a topic as well. B complex, upping that during intensity of workouts on the high end. But I guess that kind of also brings up making sure that you're getting that supplementation if you're not getting it from the diet. Early on in the conversation, Andrea had mentioned making sure our friends who are vegetarian or eating in that manner, making sure that you're getting that B complex. There was a conversation on the table possibly about other sources like a spirulina or just a protein source to make sure that you're getting those B complexes. We can touch a little bit on that as far as making sure you have those complexes in and them.
This is where the quality of your supplement is incredibly important, because with Bs, now generally B12 can fall a bit deficient. A lot of it can be based on diet and digestion and absorptive function. But a lot of cheaper supplements are synthetic and they're not very well absorbed. And for some of us that may have slight genetic differences in our methylation pathways, they're not even going to be that effective. So that's where something like, the Thorne product that I was telling you, when you look at your Bs, so your riboflavin will be riboflavin 5-phosphate, your niacin will be niacinamide, your vitamin B6 will be pyridoxal 5-phosphate. These are the biologically active forms. Your folic acid will not be just folate, which a lot of us have issues with converting. It will be 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate. So that's where the quality of the product is really important, and you do get somewhat what you're paying for. So whenever you're buying a supplement, if you don't know, just ask the person, is that the biologically available form? The same with minerals.
Yeah. But again, how about the blood test? Because you might think to yourself, well, I read somewhere that if I don't eat red meat, I might be deficient in blank, and then you go and you buy a supplement and you take it. But is that true, right? Unless you look at what's going on in a blood panel, you're not going to know. I was surprised in my last blood panel to learn that I have a ton of B12. It's like excess B12, and that can be other things too. But yeah, so just taking supplements blindly, I guess, is tricky.
Yeah.
I agree.
The reason why there's lots of smiles in the coach's corner here, and the reason why is because we have this chat that we go through kind of all week, and not only do we share photos of friends and family, but we also share our blood tests between each other. So
we're a bunch of crazy people over here.
So and this week, actually, I haven't shared this with the coaches yet, but I'll be doing my physical coming up next week. So I will ask for a full panel and it'll be like, why do you need all this?
But I love reading blood tests. I totally nerd out on them. They give such clues. But yes, you are correct. I think with vitamin B12, vitamin D, and iron, we need to know where we're at before we just blindly supplement. Like for example, with iron, someone was ripping me off for using fancy words. So here's another one for you. In Ireland, genetically, or anyone that is Celtic, we would have a lot of hemochromatosis, which is an ability to go really high with our iron. So if you were one of those people and you thought, well, I'm a cyclist and I want to take iron because I want to make sure I have enough oxygen in my system because I want to go faster than everyone, you could be genetically prone to really high iron already and start tossing more in. And iron is pretty dangerous in high amounts. That's why our bloodstream tries to control it. So you're better off find your numbers and sort of get a picture. It's like your own biological passport for your nutrition levels. So you get to understand your body, because I've seen some people respond really quick, some people respond really slow.
Right.
And then you kind of understand it a bit better.
Yeah, I think it's important. And speaking of your biological photo, Ian does want a video of that colonoscopy that Mitch is going to be getting later this week. So.
not there yet.
I have an interesting story on that, because I had a gastroscope this week.
That's right.
I pulled in every part of my mental skills from cycling, so I don't actually know where I passed out and where I was meditating. So cycling skills add so much.
Funny. All right. So we are coming up on time, and I want to be respectful to the coaches and as well as the listeners that have hung on to us here live and everybody who has joined in the conversation. So we had a great talk today about the cadence and kind of our experiences and best practices, and a great conversation about the usages and kind of different periodizations and sources of branched chain amino acids today. So if you have a topic that you would like us to cover, let us know in the forum. Head over to lab.fit. So let's jump over to our last pieces here. Do we have a listener's challenge of the week? Seeing that we may not, that's all right. Blank stares. So let's cover for our week in the lab. There were a couple skills that we had covered. This is our 8th week for those that are in the execution lab. And so I can throw this over to Taya to kind of go over skills that we covered this week as we prepare for On the Horizon.
We started the week with endurance lab pulls. So we were simulating hard pulls that you would do in a group race or race setting. So taking turns at the front and holding the power as you transition into the back of the group. And at the end of that workout, we had some long sprints. So going back to what we were talking about earlier in the podcast, if you're not a sprinter, don't wait for the last 200 meters. Those are the things in the Endurance Lab Pulls workout that we practice. Those are great ones to keep practicing so you can put it to work for you during the races. We had a VO2 444. That is a classic VO2 workout, and happy to report a lot of our riders in the lab were able to do this and see great improvements compared to where they started a couple months ago. So lots of great reports from that one. And then we had the lab valleys 4. So it's like the inverted pyramid valleys, teaching the rider's body to recover from super threshold efforts, quickly dipping just below threshold and getting that adaptation on. Valleys 4, as you can imagine, was building on Valleys 3. And so, again, a nice opportunity for our members to see how they progressed through the last 8 weeks on these workouts.
Excellent. Yeah, so wrapping up a really strong week. This is our 8th week of this lab, so that will wrap up the execution. And so what that does is have us take a look up on the horizon. What do we have next? Writers typically time off, or am I going to transition to something else? So let's talk a little bit on the horizon and what us as the Endurance Lab coaches have planned for you coming up if you are looking to do the lab with us or join our next lab. So what do we have on the horizon?
So we have a group of athletes who are still doing the Academy Booster Lab for Zwift Academy. So they're going to be still doing work through this upcoming week. And we have 2 weeks off for people finishing up this week, the execution lab. And for those 2 weeks that you have off, the comment is don't go bananas. What does banana mean? It's really taking a break. It's very important to take that break. Not saying that you should be off the bike. Recommendation is go on fun rides. If you're going to do intensity, don't do more than 2 a week, and keep the other ones easy. And take advantage of the weather. Take advantage of what you have going on in your region. If you want to try, a cyclocross clinic like I did, or a first cyclocross race, which are short, especially if you're starting out, those are 20 minutes long or 25 minutes long. Just some of those things. And but really, the goal is to be rested and refreshed for when we restart in October.
Excellent. So a lot of things coming up. Definitely keep an eye out for that. Anything else from the coaches here before we sign off?
I have a challenge.
There we go.
Awesome.
Here we get one. Hear it.
So on our forum, our Share Your Dinner, I want to see people's BCAA high meals. Let's get some ideas going. Quick ones. We'll make it like quick, not fancy, so that we all have a chance. All
right, we got a really fun dinner tomorrow night, so I'll throw some photos up.
That's good. There's no BCAAs in beer, Mitch.
There'll be all kinds of BCAAs in this meal.
That's excellent. All right. I want to remind everybody that this podcast is brought to you by the coaches of the Endurance Lab, and that our labs are specifically designed to help you achieve your structured training goals with essentially a group of cyclists just like you and triathletes working towards the similar goals. And in these labs, you'll have direct access to us, the certified coaches and experts in various aspects of endurance training. You'll also learn from your own peers going through the same lab as you access through our forum. You use online training and cycling platforms that include Training Peaks, Zwift, and Trainer Road to help facilitate group interactions. So head over to endurancelab.fit to see when our next lab begins, and that's in about 3 weeks. So again, thank you for joining us today here in the Coach's Corner. But if it's your first time listening and would like to hear more content from the Endurance Lab, head over to your favorite podcast app and search the Endurance Lab, or head over to YouTube and search the same and click subscribe. For more information when the next lab is, head over to endurancelab.fit to learn where you can join us to train smart and get results. We'll see everybody. Bye.